Okay, so I've begun recording. This is the September meeting of Faculty Advisory Committee, September 2023. Let's begin with approval of, we have two sets of minutes to approve today, both July and August. The drafts are linked right on the agenda. And I can also, I know you'll want to share them, so. Okay, here they are. Okay, do we have a motion for the July minutes? Do we need more time?
So moved.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so one abstention. Okay, thank you. And now let's do August, which I will share a moment. And here we go. Okay. All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, second? Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
This is Linda. I wasn't here, so I'll abstain.
Okay, and Rob also. Okay. All right, onto the agenda. I know that there has been, we should add one more thing to the agenda, and that is an update on the issue that we discussed last time of BISC, right? Do we want to put that right after, let's put that as number 7? Okay,
So moved.
second? In favor? I see your hand, Rob, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so reports of the chair and vice chair. I think I'm gonna give it to you first, David.
Oh, joy. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me
Sure.
share. Okay, do you have the correct one? It says Vice Chair report to FAC?
Yes.
Okay. So this is part of it is just a slight review. That was, remember, the final budget. And I think we've seen this before, but recall that what was added in at the level of the legislature was an extra $50 million to the transition from ARPA and another $55 million of carry forward, which makes a total of $105 million more. And there was an increase for PACT and also a one-year support for the GPAs, the advisors who had been hired all on soft money over the objections that we had made at the time. So that makes for close to $120 million additional. But of course, we know the problem is in 2015, the ARPA money from the governor, the 97.7, goes down to 48.8, and the additional $50 million in the legislature disappears. And the carryover that the legislature added, 55 million, goes down by half to 27.5, so that the total goes from 632 million to 516 million. And that's where, of course, the big problem in 2025 occurs. If we look at what was in the June finance report, and this may be all old news to you as well, but it's good to remind everybody, there were projected deficits. And if you look at the total, you see the projected deficit for 24 was 13.7 million, rising to 146. And then they added in FY26 projection. I don't know how they did that. It seems to me speculative, because of course there are supposed to be deficit mitigation measures that have to be submitted by November the 1st of this year. So that seems somewhat dubious to me. But in any case, these numbers as well are out of date. So for example, here are the numbers. I just gave the example of the CCSU. There was an August special meeting of the Finance Committee where the CFOs of the 6 institutions all gave reports as to their current status of their budgets. And CCSU on latest projections had a $17 million deficit surplus, as opposed to 13.5 that was listed in the June figures, a $2.1 million surplus rather than the $4.7 million deficit, and then in brackets, a possible $3.5 to $4.9 million deficit in FY26. So this is one of the problems that we've had for a long time, that the numbers change from month to month. I give greater credence to the numbers from my university, but we have to really, ask questions about what we get from the system office and how they figure out those numbers. There's too much variability there from month to month. That said, I'll just briefly mention here the faculty and staff. This was in the June, I believe this is in the June finance report, so I may already have reported on it, but it's good to have it again. And you can see, if you look here at the bottom, compared to FY 2019, there are 170 fewer full-time faculty in the system, although 189 additional staff. And the staff is a generic term. It includes both the unionized professional staff, but also non-union management confidential. So we don't know exactly which group is increasing and at what rate. And that's a further information I think we need to get. But if you look here, the reduction in part-time faculty is nearly 2,000. And as well for staff, 790. And that's mainly from here at CT State, where they are expecting a reduction from in FY24 of 1,754 part-time faculty and 68 full-time faculty. That's, of course, significant, and one has to ask the obvious question about what happens to the quality, and for that matter, the quantity of courses available to the students. If you look at the universities, full-time faculty, compared to 2019, CCSU has 19 fewer, Eastern has 42 fewer, Western has 10 fewer, and I'm sorry, I've mixed it up. Western has 31 fewer, Southern has 10 fewer, and Eastern has 42 fewer. That's the largest numbers. So I think that's relevant too. In particular, this number here is gigantic for decrease of faculty and staff at the community college. Returning to the discussion, and I think I may have mentioned this at the last meeting, but it's obviously the item du jour. This is the deficit mitigation and program review resolution that was passed at the last Finance Committee meeting and then modified in a somewhat confused way at the subsequent board meeting. I'm drawing here from the staff report. There were really 5 issues that were all combined together in one resolution, and this resolution is impacting us in a serious way. One was the question of having deficit mitigation plans. Secondly, and this is a rather important one, was to require the system office, this is the staff report, require the system office to develop and administer procedures for all CSU institutions to undertake a systematic review of academic offerings in order to ensure that they are meeting student and workforce demands and are financially sustainable within anticipated state subsidy levels. This was translated in the resolution to the following, that the CSU president shall lead all CSU institutions in an urgent and comprehensive effort to review academic and student support programs to ensure they meet the mission of CSU in a cost-effective manner. And this, of course, is now being applied at all of the institutions. I'm going to come back to that in one moment and mention some of the other measures which were included in that resolution. One was to authorize the system to retain outside consultants to recommend or assist with changes necessary. This is to assure institutional sustainability in the face of financial and demographic pressures. This was the system study, which, however, has been removed or at least modified in the sense that the originally planned $4 million from system reserves has now been excluded. That was an amendment made at the June board meeting subsequent to this finance committee meeting. The mitigation plan aspect of the resolution was modified on an amendment proposed by Mayor Aaron Stewart of New Britain, who's a new member of the board, to have a November 1st date as to the required time or date at which all of the 6 institutions have to submit their mitigation plans. And then there was the $4 million of system reserves. So the main thing here is this bit that I want to talk about. The comprehensive effort to review academic and student support programs to ensure that they meet the mission of CSU in a cost-effective manner. And I'm going to give you an example now of what happens, and this has been circulated in my university. It's not a private document. What happens when you follow what the system office is requiring of the 6 institutions. What they do is to simply consider the number of FTE majors in a particular program. So, for example, anthropology has 22 FTE. They then figure out the total revenue simply by multiplying the number of FTE majors times the tuition and fees that those students would be paying, and from which they subtract then what they consider as total expenses, namely salary, fringe, and OE, that's office expenses. And as you can see, it's not hard to go into the red here. And in fact, of 40 programs that are listed, 12 or 30% are supposedly here in income loss. Now you can imagine the impact that this has when this is given to faculty, but moreover, let me note the following, that it considers only FTE majors revenue versus salary, fringe, and OE expenses. And I'm going to give a tale of 2 metrics. It's my department. We've discussed this at length at an emergency meeting of the department, which we had yesterday. Here is the CSCU system office metric. And again, to the point of repeating myself, it only considers FTE majors. But let me indicate that, for example, in my department, and that's pretty well the situation in others, we have minors. They are taking 18 credits as opposed to 36 credits in the major. We meet with them on a regular basis to advise them. We do at least half the amount of work that we do with majors, but they are not counted at all. Secondly, we have an extensive general education program with introduction to philosophy, introduction to logic, courses up to the 300 level, which students, based on their interest and their general education requirements, can take. Those are not considered as well. We have interdisciplinary programs. I'll mention one of which I happen to be the co-coordinator, namely peace studies. It's not taken into consideration at all. I should add in passing that, well, I'll add other details about that at some other time. So if you do the system model, you get a $1.2 million deficit. I'm not exactly sure what that means. And of course, when we consider this, I don't know that we're in a situation to remediate that. But if you look at a different model, and this is another model which has been developed at the university, this one takes into account majors, minors, general education, ID programs, and does a reasonable calculation, which is student credit hours to FTE load credits. That's our first category here. The second one is the same here as in the system model, total revenue. Expenses are the same as well, but we also have indirects, because there are other revenues at the university generated by students, and in particular, it's their residence fees and indirect. When you do that calculation, all of a sudden, my department goes from a $1.2 million deficit to a $1.2 million surplus. Now, I'll leave for discussion what people think about this, but it clearly indicates that, first of all, doing a cost accounting department by department or program by program gives you numbers which may in fact be quite meaningless. In the system way of doing things, guess which departments have the largest deficits? Mathematics, English, chemistry and biochemistry, and nursing.
Well, we should cut them
Various
out,
reasons.
obviously.
Right. That's obvious. Thank you, Andre. Right. And that's not the case when you do a more correct accounting. I'm not sure if this is the way I would myself do it, but it's certainly a better way of doing it. And we go from 12 of 40 programs to 5 of 40 programs, or 12%. And even then, it's not clear what that actually indicates. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the comments I made at the last meeting of the Finance Committee. And the resolution was resolution concerning the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities spending plans for FY24 and additional actions to resolve current and future budget shortfalls. When that came to the board, there were 3 modifications, adding, as I said, the November 1st deadline, excluding the use of outside consultants for the proposed system study, and removing the proposed $4 million of system reserves. But even at that, there's some confusion in the minutes because no written statement of the proposed amendments was made, and the resolution as amended is not contained in the minutes, merely the indications by the chair of the Finance Committee of the amendments that he wished to make. So there's a problem there, but I'm going to leave that aside. What's clear is that one not very well written resolution dealt with 4 different issues. The approving the spending plans for FY24, requiring the preparation and submission of remediation plans to deal with expected deficits. 3, calling for a comprehensive review, and I'm going to return to that issue of review of academic and student support programs. And 4, proposing a study of the system itself. A number of, I'm going to mention now here 2 issues. The first one is this terminology of a comprehensive review of academic and student support programs done on a sort of cost, surplus, or loss basis. And I'm going to not mention the question of how in the world do you evaluate the student support services? Does the bursar office make money or simply cost the expense of the various individuals who work for it? I have no idea how you calculate this for student support services, but I want to limit myself to the academic programs and to indicate firstly that when the word review is used, a lot of people said, well, this is an APR. And we know that acronym stands for Academic Program Review. But that is something specified in the collective agreements. It's done on an institution by institution basis. It's bottom up, not top down. And it's something that for which you prepare many months in advance, and it's done on a 5 to 7 year basis. Clearly, that's loose terminology on the part of the resolution to talk about this as a program review. That's incorrect. Some have suggested when I brought this up that, well, really it's a academic program planning, but that's incorrect as well. academic program planning is done again at an institutional level. It is a procedure involving departments, programs, the deans, the provost, and ultimately the university president and the university senate. This is not something that can be done between now and November the 1st, and especially in the way in which the system office is proposing it. So that's wrong as well. I at one point suggested maybe we can call this a academic program accounting, although I don't know why you would want to do it in this department or program by program or department by department, and they're different, right? Because a department may have more than one program. Why one would want to do this? What is the point of showing that, I don't know, the journalism department has a $750,000 loss? And I asked this of a senior member of the system office, who indicated to me in response, well, maybe the history department has a surplus, and so the history department is subsidizing the journalism department. Actually, I'd given the example of chemistry and biochemistry, so let me use that one. And of course, that doesn't make any sense either, because we don't do that. We don't do ever a calculation and say, by the way, faculty in the history department, you're subsidizing the chemistry and biochemistry department. I mean, it's illogical. I don't think anyone would consider that as a reasonable way of looking at it. I discussed this with at the finance committee meeting, and Lloyd Blanchard, the new vice president, or perhaps he's a vice chancellor for finance and the CFO, suggested maybe this is an academic program inventory. But in that case, you'd like to know how many faculty are involved, how many are full-time, how many are part-time, what is the graduation rate, and so forth. So this isn't an inventory either. And I concluded this with saying, I draw the attention of the committee to these two problems. The substantial issue which confuses, I was using the term cost accounting, with a program review, and the problem of the use of an inadequate metric, simply in the number of majors, based on one parameter for conducting a cost analysis. So we can return to discuss that. There was a question asked earlier, and so let me just conclude with just this brief discussion of the reserves, because I think we have to have a proper discussion of this. If not this meeting, then I think at the next meeting, and think about what it is we want to do with these reserves and what we want to recommend. But if you look at this, and I don't know if you can see it, I may try to make it slightly larger. CCSU, this is in the June report. CCSU has $58 million in reserve, $6 million of which is designated, and as this is the system office report, not from the then CFO, not available for operations. So that leaves total available for operations, $52 million. At Eastern, $31 million in reserves, just slightly over 250,000 encumbered or designated for other purposes, leaving $31 million available in reserves for operations. At Southern, 34 million, less 6 million, 27 million. At Western, which is our problem child in the system, sorry to say, $1.3 million, but almost all of that is encumbered. They have at most $110,000 for reserve. That wouldn't even pay the salary of a single faculty member. But notice this, CSU system office, $74 million in reserve in the system office for the 4 universities, of which a considerable amount actually is designated. And that may be, I'm speculating here, for bonding and other purposes, leaving, however, $25 million available. So that means that the total for the 4 universities and the system office reserves for the 4 universities is $200 million, of which $63 million is designated, leaving $137 million for, quote, operations. If we then go on to the other 2 institutions, I'll do briefly Charter Oak here. It's $7 million, 200,000 is designated. That's $7.4 million available. But look at the numbers for the CT State. $100 million in reserves, which I assume is what they've done by combining the reserves of all of the 12 former colleges, of which slightly more than $250,000 is designated, leaving $99.8 million in available reserves at CT State. I think this should be the subject of a discussion that we have at the next meeting. But I want to return now to this whole question, namely the so-called comprehensive academic program review. I think this is something which, and Kalina can perhaps talk about it, or I can. At least two universities, and I'm not sure about Southern, but Central and Eastern have both passed resolutions in opposition. And I'm going to put this forward. Can you see it now? Kalina, can you see CCSU Faculty Senate?
No, we're still on the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
I'm going to
David?
have to then,
Maybe unshare and read.
yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
David, let me interrupt and just let you know that on Wednesday, Southern also passed.
Okay, so now we've got 3 of the 4 universities. This is significant. Let me just, however, figure out how I get out of this. I may never do that. Okay.
Top of the screen.
Top of screen. You're sharing, stop. Okay, now I'm going to share again. And it is now, do you have it?
Yes.
All right. This is a resolution. Actually, it was first passed at Eastern, and Central agreed. I don't know that we modified it in any way. Did you modify it at Southern, Mike? So
Yes,
here's
we
the
did.
resolution.
We modified it. We talked about, partly talked about a different approach to get more money. But you know, in a sense that was rather than doing this program, just we need more money. But it's basically the same idea.
Good. Okay, so I think we can have probably a motion to endorse the resolution on the model of the CCSU one, understanding that there could be slight differences between the Eastern and the Western one. And what we'll do is we'll forward all 3 of them. And if Western has one as well, all 4 to the board for its next meeting. But let me read it. Whereas Chancellor Chang pledged transparency and respect for shared governance from himself and the system office. Whereas Chancellor Chang notified the system of June 28, 2023, that the system office would, quote, develop and administrate procedures for all CSU institutions to undertake a system review of academic offerings pursuant to the BOR resolution dated the same day. So that's the comprehensive academic program review that I've just been talking about. Whereas the decision was made over the middle of the summer when faculty who were in charge of curriculum were off contract and given little notice or opportunity to respond publicly to the resolution. Whereas the FAC and university shared governing bodies, including senates, have not yet received a draft program review to be considered and revised. Well, apparently that has begun. Whereas Chancellor Chang at the 8/23/23 meeting of the Finance and Infrastructure meeting stated that the data needed for academic planning and assessment had already been gathered, unbeknownst to elected union leaders, Senate presidents, and FAC representatives. And that's the form which I just showed you, which has already been filled out at my university. Whereas faculty at our 4 CSUs have now been notified by the CSU System Office and BOR are ordering the CSUs to assess every academic program at their institution, a process which can take 1 year and one major, but now it's expected to be completed in less than 1 semester, right? And again, it's become a cost accounting, which has probably already been done at the 4 institutions, whereas faculty, the only ones who have with the expertise to properly design the metrics and assessment tools to evaluate their academic programs. That's a very important point, obviously. Faculty control over curriculum and its assessment. Whereas faculty also understand the urgency in the academic realignment process in order to meet budgetary shortfalls, whereas faculty should be actively involved in every step of the academic planning process. Again, there's review, there's planning, and there's accounting. There's 3 separate things, all muddled up and combined together in the BOR resolution. Be it resolved that the CSU Faculty Senate, and I take it this is the same thing as Eastern, and I presume Southern as well had this as well, calls on the CSU System Office to fulfill its pledge and make its intentions and process transparent around academic planning, so it can be reviewed, discussed, and debated by all stakeholders, including students, faculty, and staff, in a democratic process. And so each program review is aligned with the missions of each institution. Be it resolved that, in the interest of shared governance, all currently collected data, financial information, and analyses to be used in the academic planning process be given to the faculty senates as faculty, so faculty can participate and properly evaluate the validity of the proposed metrics. Be it resolved that, in the interest of shared governance, the currently proposed timeline by the system office be removed and redesigned in consultation with the faculty senates. So that was approved first at the Eastern, at Eastern, secondly at Central on September the 11th, and Mike Shea is now reporting that it's been approved at Southern. So I would entertain a motion to endorse the resolutions at Eastern, Central, and Southern.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we need any further discussion?
I just wanted to offer a couple of things.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
There's also a gaping hole in this APP process, which is, here I have our collective bargaining agreement. And in the collective bargaining agreement, in terms of evaluation criteria for faculty, there's listed load credit activity, which is usually teaching. There's listed creative activity, and there's listed productive service. So the leadership of CSU asked our faculty to do all three of these things, and they are placing a value of 0 on 2 of them, creative activity and service, which, by the way, is something we're all doing right now in response to a ask from Connecticut's General Assembly to staff this committee. And CSU's APP process tells the state that that is worth $0. In addition, I've noticed that Western's professor Mohinder Dougal received a Fulbright in September 2022 to go study in Bahrain, work in Bahrain, and bring back additional quality teaching and creative activity and service as part of that Fulbright. And I find it frankly insulting that anyone would say that has 0 value to our communities. So not only is this measurement of so-called teaching revenue incorrect, but it is also incorrect to zero out our scholarship, creative activity, and service to our communities as part of this process. And I am not happy about it. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'd
Brendan,
like
I
to second
appreciate your comments.
that emotion.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said I'd like to second that emotion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll third it. Because take me as an example. On Thursday, so that was yesterday, I had 60 students in philosophy classes. I had 140 students in peace study classes. And this is between Wednesday and Thursday, and I had 12 students in the honors program. According to the system counting, 152 of those students don't count. The Peace Studies program doesn't count because it's not even mentioned in their list of programs, because the only programs they seem to be concerned about are programs which lead to a major and a degree. That's unsatisfactory as well to me. That's insulting, actually.
Yep.
So it's more than just an. I would use a stronger metaphor, but I have precedent indicates that I really shouldn't. And I'll leave it at that.
The horse is out of it.
Yes. But yeah, that's fine. I'll say no more.
I'll just add, because I I'm glad you point that out, Brendan, that it is consistent with that sort of disregard for service, for additional work, etc., is fairly consistent in the way that have been burdened, let's say at the community colleges, for the projects of the central office for the past few years. And an honest accounting would need to take that into consideration. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Anything? Oh, go ahead, Andre.
Yeah, I mean, what's missing here is some kind of approach that is rational to indeed trying to, well, reduce costs and increase revenues. In other words, some kind of plan. Now, when I had a couple of years of deaning at Gateway, one of the things I did is that first of all, I had a pretty sophisticated way of calculating and anticipating and forecasting enrollment by discipline, by department, by course, etc. And what I had done is simply ask the different departments and jointly with them, set targets for average enrollment, and then planned accordingly and saved a few $100,000. And the important thing here is that we should think like an economist. You should be looking at marginal cost, not average cost. In other words, the question is, if you want to, if you're thinking about whether you should offer more classes, again, it's okay. So, what's the marginal cost of that running that class? Okay, and then take a look at what revenue you get from the from tuition and so on, and make that kind of calculation. And like I said, if you set targets, I mean that's at least an approach, because that allowed us to, in fact, offer courses that were very low enrolled but very important for strategic reasons or graduation reasons. At the same time, we actually did increase the average enrollment in the college quite a lot. But I don't know. These people don't understand stuff like that, so.
Anything else? Do we want to take we ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay. So all in favor of endorsing this resolution that has been passed by Central, Southern, and Eastern?
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, and any abstentions?
Abstention, Diane.
I am still abstention here as well.
Okay, got it.
I should say we're working on a resolution at Western. We have a problem with getting the new president to get in touch with us. So, but we've been working on a resolution. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Rob. If you have that resolution by Thursday, please forward it to me so that when I do my so-called interrupt report, because as you know, the FAC, even though we are a statutory committee by Section 185 of state statutes, we do not merit an agenda item on the BOR agenda. So I just do an interrupt at some more or less appropriate moment, and I will certainly communicate this. So if you have the one from Western, I will add it in.
Yeah, our Senate meeting is Wednesday, so I'll get it to you right after.
Good. Thank you very much. That'd be great. And I think you should stress that, the three other universities plus FAC have improved that.
Okay. Is that it for you, David?
That's enough for me.
Okay.
I find this, I must say, stressful to continuously have to be pointing out to people at the board and at the system office that their failure to communicate and consult with us results in significant mistakes on their part. We aren't here as a committee to denounce the system office or the board. That's not our job. Our job, and it's specified in Section 185 of the statutes, is to advise and assist. And to the extent that they continue to do this, to present resolutions that have been poorly formulated, even in terms of just the terminology which is used, whether it's a review or planning or accounting or inventory, that is detrimental to the system as a whole.
Yeah.
And we are not able to fulfill our statutory role unless they are willing to do the consultation, to do the communication. And on that basis, we can have cooperation. And we can have something that they really do desire, which is coordination. But absent the first two C's, you don't get the next two C's. What you get is non-cooperation. When it's a command and control. Kalina is smiling because she knows how much I like the C's. But the point is, I think it's quite true. Jennifer?
Thank you. I was going to make that exact point a little bit later, but I just wanted, since you brought it up, to say that I was just at a faculty meeting today at the Three Rivers campus, and my colleagues were just bombarding me with, who's the group that's doing anything about all these things. And I'm like, it's the FAC, but no one seems to respond to anything. So it's like, we spend all this time and energy organizing, frustrating, making connections and writing resolutions and stuff. But I'm just wondering what the faculty can do to further support the FAC, because the FAC is trying so hard and working so hard. And I was on sabbatical, but I still attended meetings, and I always report out to my campus in a written report and a verbal report. But I think there's frustration for like the chain of command of things and like knowing what to do. As a quick example, I'm in arts and humanities, and Dr. Baker came and he gave a presentation, and he's supposed to be my dean, but he presented everything as if it was from a marketing standpoint. And then I asked a question, someone from philosophy asked a question about scheduling, and he said, well, contact the scheduling people. And it just seemed so confusing to me how there isn't an awareness that there is no one on the scheduling department that's going to listen to what a faculty has to say, really, right? So there's all of these little problems that people are facing, and I think it speaks to your issue of, I'm just wondering I just want to kind of say it back to them, well, what can we do then to support the FAC? Because we're all getting at the same thing. We're not getting answers to all of these things other than this notion of, well, it's growing pains and deal with it, or blaming someone else for something that happened. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I've told the faculty on my campus I would make the exact point you just made, so I feel like I did. I don't know what else to do with it, but thank you.
Well, one thing that you can do also is have people, line up for or submit electronically or remotely for the public comment period in the upcoming Thursday meeting of the board. I think they should be informed of what are the problems. I mean, I don't want to preempt Kalina's report, which I can imagine is complicated, about what's going on at the community colleges. But I think it's important that we stress once again and do what we can to impress upon those who may be willing to listen. I've made I sort of walked the plank a number of occasions saying, well, there's changes in the executive of the system office of the CSCU. We have a new chancellor. We have a new vice chancellor. Apparently, there's yet another vice chancellor coming in, the former director of communication from Governor Lamont's office. We have new members of the board, new chair and vice chair, and new chair of the ASA committee, and so forth. So we have to distinguish between problems that we've inherited from the previous system office and the previous board leadership, and what the current new, fairly renewed leadership is trying to do. But they have to make bigger efforts. Their efforts to date are not, in my view, satisfactory. We've talked to people and they've seemed open and willing to discuss with us on a one-to-one basis. But when we look at what's actually happening, we don't see a consistency with that. And that's a significant problem.
So I agree to the comments at the board, but there's also, I mean, I think the question that you're asking is the question, right? We have all of these, we keep adding structures, and we keep adding structures closer to the top. And what we're seeing is, whether in the case of this program review or in the case of our now new restructured curriculum discipline committees, student services, whatever. Many of these new structures increase our workloads and pull us in new directions without straightforwardly affecting the challenges that we're trying to address on a day-to-day. So it's just this additional thing. And I think, at the community colleges, you could say that there's a lot you can say have to do with growing pains, but it is the final result of a well-established for more than a decade system office project that was imposed on us. So it's growing pains, but it's also the product of what the system is and has been. And when you think about what the system office contributes, we'd like it to be advocacy on behalf of the system that would increase our state funding, but we have not seen that. We have a block grant that has not grown and is at risk of dropping off, right? We see underfunded community colleges right now. And now we are also tasked with these sorts of academic projects that either are misinformed in their reasoning or start up, get a lot of work like, our transfer articulation, and then get abandoned when a new project comes up. So, the question that you're asking in terms of, it would be lovely if there were a very simple answer as to how things work and what is effective. I think part of the challenge that we face is that, we are ex officio on the board. Our role is to advise, but there is no straightforward ability to do that. The system office stands between us and the board very often. And that's the challenge that I think we need to probably discuss amongst ourselves. I think it's also a question that the study group is attempting to take on. Yeah. Would that be correct? Or at least trying to start. So, yeah, that is the question. Okay.
Well, and I gave them
yeah.
an overview of the study group and sent then the survey and all of the stuff
Right.
too. I think today it's just like everything came to a head in a venting section. They're like, what's happening with BISC? What courses are impacted? What's happening with the syllabus template? Like people were like losing their minds today at me. So
yeah. So, we can talk about some of that, because we do have a section on like opening, the community college, like opening. Maybe I'll reserve it for that. But yeah, there are legitimate questions about what goes where and who talks to who. I'll say only at this point, like there are going to be a lot of things that I'm going to talk about in my report that in a world where things were more streamlined, I would be better informed by governance for CT State. But that they're not quite up and running yet. It certainly haven't met yet this semester. It didn't meet all summer long. There are a lot of issues, pressing issues with deadlines coming. Census date is in a few days, right? And we haven't had the benefit of having that information. So there's a degree to which we're almost working backwards to each other at the moment. But we have to talk about these issues. So I hope that there will come a time where we are getting things from CT State that address the kinds of issues that I'll talk about today. Most of the information is sort of incomplete, but these are floating around. So I just want to make sure that we at least touch on them. One of the things that I want to talk about, because it's relevant to not the very last board finance meeting, which was only about renaming the New Britain building. It is now called what? The New Britain Center for Higher Education?
That is correct.
Yes. Okay.
That was
And
the sole item on the agenda. So I brought up the objections to the comprehensive program review as a point related to adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that was actually
Most
really
of the meeting.
useful. Yes. Rest assured that if you want your name on this building, though, it can be added for the appropriate donation. But keeps me going. All right. So at the meeting before that, the finance committee, I think it was I think unusual these days in its scope. The leaders of each institution sat with the committee and presented their financial situation and projections directly to the board. And I thought that it was just at least nice to see that interaction. It was nice to hear from places like Central, who seem to be addressing these issues proactively. Just kind of hear the reasoning, the methods, etc. To know that someone's in charge, right? CT State, even, the outlook is dismal, but I found it encouraging to hear leadership talk about the issues rather bluntly. Few things that we learned, and then there's Western, where the outgoing interim president made some suggestions about how he could imagine deficits being addressed. But there is a new president as of like last month. So, that is, so I think, I wouldn't want to, we don't know what that president's going to do now, so we'll have to see. So that's sort of, on delay. But for CT State, the numbers still are what they were. One thing that I thought was interesting that we learned is that for this year, $9.6 million of our, let me make sure I'm looking at my notes right, and of our reserves are being used for fiscal year 24. Holding on to the rest. And the other thing that we learned was that, so CSCU has a policy on target reserve levels, and that target for the system, I guess it is, I have to make sure, but it's not specific to CT State, right, is 5 to 7% of expenditures, and that was established in 2016. CT State has not yet established their standard, but it appears that what we're working with is about 4 months operating costs. Okay, so those are different standards, and there are possibly different justifications. I have been in touch with Carrie Kelly and other folks from CFO's office, and I believe I'm supposed to be talking to our new CFO for the system, and hope to get a little bit more clarity on what that standard will be, how it's to be established, right? Like, I don't think it's officially anywhere yet, and justification. The other thing, and they've been really, I think, would have been very happy to come in and talk with us today. It just couldn't happen schedule-wise. The other thing that I think is worthwhile talking to the CFO's office about, that came up in that meeting also, is how the new fringe benefit calculation affects us. And at CT State in particular, the report is that it affects us pretty negatively. But there is definitely some pushback from OPM suggesting that our system's calculations of how that fringe benefit is to affect us could use some work. So there's a dispute there, and I think that dispute is very important to resolve. And I'd really like to have folks come in. So, they've been very responsive. I hope to meet with them soon, and I hope to have them come in and provide something written for us at least next time, so that we can confidently talk about where we stand financially, and why this dispute with OPM is happening at all, right? There's a huge lack of trust in this whole circle, and we just, at least could have something laid out in front of us so that we have a sense of which of these narratives is more believable. And then, okay, so that's the reserves and the fringe benefit and this communication with OPM, which has continued into the month of August. I think most of us received through some source a letter that came from OPM to President Cheng, right? At the beginning of August. Basically, it seemed to imply that not only should we not expect more funding in this biennium, in this budget, but really shouldn't be too hopeful of the next, which is a very dismal outlook, certainly for CT State, possibly for Western. Other universities are doing kind of okay. So yeah, that's ongoing. Hopefully we'll get more clarity. Let's see. What else do we want to talk about? So I did naming of new. Oh, so I shared with, so I'm going to move on to this CPOS, right? What is it? Course and Program of Study, I think it is, right? Which is an Ellucian tool. It's just a bit of technology that is intended to be applied in a way that it simply makes sure that we are compliant with federal financial aid restrictions on courses having to apply to some degree in order to be covered by federal financial aid. At first, we thought it was only happening at CT State. I know it's definitely also been applied at Southern. Haven't been able to get much more information about the other universities, but there are definitely some differences in how it's applied at Southern versus how it's applied at CT State. Some of them are incidental just in terms of limitations given our transitional status, and others possibly are not. So I emailed everyone a sort of write up on what those are. So like, what is the federal financial, because I know a lot of us were asking like, what is this policy? So what the policy is, what the board policy from 2017 that reflects that is, etc. But there are a number of concerns at CT State that I think don't necessarily exist at Southern, simply because of the situation that we're in. The reason that I think that it is a topic for FAC is that there are aspects of the way that this thing is being applied that appear to amount to policy changes in the way that we deal, they amount to policy changes, even though those changes might be inadvertent, right? Just an outcome of the way this thing is applied. And if that is correct, then that is something that needs to be addressed through governance, right? We're being told this is just a tool. It's an Ellucian tool. It simply conforms to what we are obligated by law to conform to anyway. But there are a good number of things that are at issue. One is that it appears in the way that it's applied at CT State to be too restrictive, right? It restricts. So I'll give you an example of something that I thought maybe shouldn't have gone this way, right? A student in the culinary program who currently works in kitchens believes that studying Spanish would be helpful for his career, right? Attempts to add it as an elective. It shows up as something he would have to pay cash for. Now, here's the problem. The remedies for these sorts of things are paper-based, multi-department, etc. Right? So can they be fixed? Yes. Will they all be addressed in time? And what happens to students in the interim? Don't know, right? So our course sub process, I have to get in touch with. I also uploaded or sent you all Tamika Davis's update on enrollment. And in it, she refers to, what is it, batch substitutions or, oh goodness, what is the thing that we've been asking for a long time? I'll look for it. But I still know of no such process. I know we've been promised these, blanket substitutions for months. but don't know that they actually exist, right? So that is supposed to be the solution to the fact that we did not do teach outs. So there is and I will, let me share this at least with you all. And there we go. Okay. So this is an announcement that pops up when students log into my ComNet, and it basically says that if you go into DegreeWorks and it's not honoring the courses that you took towards your program, and the number of credits you need to take to graduate have significantly increased, not to worry, contact your advisor, and we can work it out, right? First of all, let's acknowledge the amount of the increased workload that suggests that most, all, I don't know, of our continuing students are in this position. But CPOS gets its information from DegreeWorks, and CPOS denies coverage, denies financial aid money for any course that does not show up as part of your program in DegreeWorks. And yet we see from this announcement that this is a common enough problem that this has to be listed as an announcement, right? So there is a lot of concern there, keeping an eye on it. We have that enrollment update. You've seen that there are exclusions for who has been dropped for non-payment so that we don't inadvertently harm students significantly because of these kinds of issues, because they may have been generated, just in case they get a bill generated inappropriately for something that should have been covered by financial aid, and then we end up dropping them. So they're part of the people who are excluded for drops right now are basically anyone who applied for financial aid. And that allows us to avoid dropping the, students who've been flagged for CPOS inadvertently or inappropriately. And then also there's a large number, though the very large number of students who have the wrong school code. The majority of them are not registered for this semester, so it kind of makes sense that they wouldn't have updated that code. There is a smaller number, I think just about 1,500-ish, who are currently enrolled, who need to be addressed, and folks are trying to address them. Again, the question is only, and I haven't gotten the answer to this question, and I think this is because we just have not been able to connect. I hope there's an answer to this question. Can we exclude students from being dropped for non-payment forever? Like, what are we doing? I don't know what that solution is. I don't know when this temporary solution ends. So we'll leave it at that. But continue to be worried that we run the risk of denying students financial aid to which they are absolutely entitled. And I think the flip side of that is if we turn this off, because our course catalog does not reflect any of our continuing students' actual program requirements, we are at risk of violating financial aid law at every turn. So we just are in this predicament. We also have, it's certainly the case that DegreeWorks is probably not completely programmed correctly. Doesn't have, it's just, I mean, yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. And some of it is unavoidable, but most of it has to do with very, 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 very poor planning, not listening to warnings, not responding to requests for very simple solutions that could reduce the workload significantly. Simple things like, can we use a Microsoft form so that we can electronically process course substitutions instead of printing it, signing it, and taking it to 3 or 4 different offices? That should be easy. Program coordinators should have the authority to do that without having many different sign-offs, and yet, remember last time we talked about this, I forwarded the request. I know that on behalf of FAC, I know that many people have made this request. Not only has no such thing appeared, but also no explanation for why it cannot be done. It's not a technology issue. No idea. So we're in the muck, and we will see. Okay. I'm not going through all the details because I did send everyone, and those you can share, right? The details of what CPOS is, what the issues are, what the enrollment update from Tamika Davis, et cetera. You all have that, so I won't go through the details there. Okay. There are more governance issues that we're aware of. I'm just going to mention them. And again, this is one of those moments that I feel that I might be overstepping Senate, but I'm going to be in conversation with them about the fact that because our curriculum was created so hurriedly, we are becoming aware of lots of times where people, meaning well, providing actually the correct resolution to students' problems, are modifying curriculum single-handedly, either managers or just a group of people who are not in the discipline at a curriculum committee deciding, well, that'll be better for students, right? So these things are happening. They need to be addressed by Senate. I hope they are addressed by Senate. Whether or not they are, we will need to address them. We violated everything concerning governance for 5 years, building a hurriedly created curriculum. It has problems. Those problems need to be solved. But what we will not do is move ahead, continually violating governance to fix it. At some point, we need to give the curriculum back to faculty, because the mess that we are in is a result of it not actually being owned by faculty and governance not being applied. So it will slow down the process of solving some of students' problems. It will slow down a lot of the resolutions to these issues, and yet I don't think that can be sacrificed any longer. So that is an issue that we have to, and it has come my way. So we will talk about it. And please, if any of you become aware of some of these, let's make sure to discuss them. Send them my way and we'll talk about them. Okay, last thing is just to mention that the study group continues. The beginning of the semester kind of has us on a little bit more of a pause than we were in the summer. But same projects. We have a really lovely, and I wish I had it in front of me right now, but summary of enrollment projections and their outcomes from Fran Cohen recently that we'll share soon. We'll just kind of have to put it together with some other stuff. So we're producing things, and it's hopefully we will be able to get something that will be helpful in the context of presenting mitigation plans before November. Did I miss anything, David? I think we covered everything. Cool. All righty. On to, and I've lost the agenda again. What do we have next?
Could I just make a comment about the CPOS business?
Uh-huh.
I mean, there seems to be a big difference between the community colleges and the universities, because at the universities, a student pursues typically 3 programs. Their major, their minor. There are some majors which don't require minors, but most do, and also the general education. So that, a greater number of courses that a student is taking should be covered even in a very narrow interpretation of CPOS. At the community colleges, if all you have is the major,
Right.
then students who want to explore are precluded from doing that. It makes it into a technical college in the old sense.
Right.
We're going to teach you how to repair, Ford cars, 6-cylinder engines. That's it.
Yeah.
That's not the ideal of public higher education. And I think we need to have a clarification of exactly what CPOS in Title IV actually, how that's interpreted and how it's applied.
Yeah.
Applying it through a Aleutian piece of software over DegreeWorks, which we know is famously inaccurate even at the universities,
Mhm.
because it can't figure out substitutions that have been made at the departmental level.
Mhm.
It can't figure out transfer credits when the number or the title of the course is different from one offered at the university. And it typically puts into free majors, free electives, courses which in fact should be in the major or in the minor. And then it can't take into account students who have 2 minors. So there's lots of problems.
Mhm. Yeah.
To have done it in the mechanistic way that they did it at the community colleges is really, I'm trying to use adjectives which are as neutral as possible. Disappointing,
Yeah.
disturbing, distracting. And how about destructive?
You're on the D's now.
Yes,
How about fucked up?
a metaphor. I'm sure
Skipped a
that
letter.
you do not mean that you are condoning unrestricted copulation.
Yes.
Look,
Good, that's a clarification what we want. Thank you.
I think what is not clear, what is still not clear is whether, and again, this is the thing, is this just extremely poor implementation? Did they just like out of the box slap it on there and not do what needed to be done? Or is this a policy? And if it is an intentional policy, this is how it is intended to be interpreted at the community colleges. I think there are a lot of different reasons where this alone, other than the chaos that it's caused this semester, even in the long run, is going to have cause serious enrollment challenges at the community colleges. For example, what happens if I'm a student at a university who wants to take a course slightly cheaper at a community college, or take it there because it's online and I can't get it at my university, or whatever it might be? And I'm not sure what the resolution is, or rather, the resolution might be so burdensome and convoluted and unclear that students will either believe that they can't do it, or simply not be bothered to go through with it. And that seems to be entirely counter to the kind of fluid, movement through our system that we aspire to. Yeah, Lewis.
I just want to kind of clear up that this CPOS issue at the community colleges did not originate with the technology. The technology is only what's being used to implement. It's the fact that the community college has chosen to take a draconian interpretation of what CPOS stands for, what it means as far as giving financial aid. And to answer Carmen's question about if everyone majors in general studies, would financial aid cover all classes? The answer to that is no, because I have one of my students who is a general studies major, who is only 3 or 4 classes before graduation. I counseled her for a number of different reasons into a lifespan development psychology course. After she registered for that course, financial aid got in touch with her and told her they wouldn't pay for it because it's not covered by her major. So it's not the technology that's leading this. It's the interpretation that's leading it, and the technology has been programmed to mirror what the interpretation has been. And it's just, as I said, it's been determined here very draconianly about what can and cannot be paid for financial aid. In many cases, if a student needs a prerequisite, for example, for calculus, which is in their program, but the prerequisite for them to take calculus is not in their program, they're being told it's not being paid for, which is ridiculous. So I just wanted to clear that up.
It's not the computer's problem, right?
It's not the computer's problem. Our catalog is incorrect. DegreeWorks doesn't work well, but that's being programmed by people.
Yes.
I mean, it's a forced march, not a guided pathway, and it's nothing to do with what we'd aspire to in terms of preparing, a college education.
And it's not like CPOS is new. It was a policy implemented by Betsy DeVos in 2018
Mhm.
when she was Secretary of Education under Donald Trump.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, you can also see that the policy, there has been some further sort of transparency and clarification on CT State's website so that students can kind of at least be prepared for the fact that this is the policy. At Southern, it clearly says, these things can happen. You are responsible for knowing whether something is your program of study. If you need to change your major, please initiate it at least 3 weeks before the beginning of the semester. None of these things was even available to our students. They don't get an immediate notification. DegreeWorks will not tell continuing students authoritatively whether or not something is or is not in their program of study. This CPOS tool wasn't turned on until maybe about 3 weeks. I don't know, a little more, but like the volume of students. So it's just, there is no workable solution. And of course, I think you're right? That this is an interpretation. It's just amazing that it would be that interpretation. One would hope that it was a poor implementation. But if it is an interpretation, this is something that needs to go to, I would say, the board level. We established a college that was shoved down our throats. We were told that it was going to be established, achieve equity, anti-racism, et cetera, et cetera. Inequities are a result of disinvestment, and yet what we've decided to do to achieve equity is disinvest in the colleges, and then furthermore, restrict the ability of community college students to achieve the ideals of the universities. If there are any differences in implementation between colleges and universities, that needs to be addressed, I think.
It's severely
It's a policy.
It's severely impacting our ESL students
Yeah.
because they're saying ESL courses are not part of a program.
There has been, I heard there's an adjustment and there's up to 30. Let's talk more about that because I'm not clear on whether any of that has been addressed. I know something else. Okay. So the next topic is same stuff again. CT State opening. So I just want to hear from other folks what you're seeing. Because we've already talked about CPOS. We've already talked about the drops for non-payment and the exclusions. I have not heard much more about, we know what the cuts to services were last time, and we had the report on how many EAs we lost right after July 1st, and then how many we stood to lose at the end of August. And we haven't gotten any further update on that, though I do think that the actual effects of these things are really contextual. And what we're not getting is any kind of differentiation between people who were, cut because of budgetary issues and because of need, right? Or because that was something that was going to be cut anyway. Also, it's becoming apparent that counting the number of EAs is really not sufficient. It's counting the EA hours because we've kept a lot of educational assistants, but significantly reduced hours also. And that's significantly reducing, what we can provide. So that's been stressing us also. But anything else at the colleges that we want to talk about in terms of frustrations? Jen, anything further on what you were talking about?
Yeah, my college people were very upset about the syllabus template. I don't know how people felt at your schools, but that just seemed to be the big issue that people were going around about. They they felt like it was too long and information should be moved in other areas. And I just mentioned that on the English side, the ACME group gave us all of these changes to the syllabus really late in August, and that was frustrating. So there were minor concerns about that. People had a lot of the CPOS questions, and those things kept coming up. And I guess that's basically it. It was just kind of like a venting session of people being like, how are all these little things happening? And it's frustrating. I shared about, and several other folks shared about the issues, like the things that people hadn't thought out, like the textbooks, the textbook problems with students taking online classes when they're all over the state and having things that aren't earmarked for what campus they're on, and trying to get books sent because the commute's too long to get to the bookstore. But then by the time you get the bookstore, like by the time they get sent, the students so far into the class that it becomes problematic if you're trying to use any kind of access code, issues of IT, lack of IT support, HR concerns. So these are just a few examples of ongoing things that came up today in the meeting.
Gotcha. Sounds about right. Matthew?
We've had kind of an interesting start of the semester. Course caps for a lot of our faculty at HCC went up. So a lot of the course caps, I think this is across the system, but we're at 30 for a lot of courses. It kind of seems a little arbitrary because other disciplines have lower course caps. Same issues with the textbooks. And then the only other thing we noticed on our campus was that the cancellations happened a little earlier than usual this year, and a lot of late start courses were also canceled before the start of the semester. So, our experience is course enrollment kind of really starts to pick up in the last week before classes start, but a lot of sections were canceled before that time period.
I know that all our philosophy late starts were inching along and now are full or over enrolled as of the last few days, right? Yeah. Carmen is saying IT support is not available at Capitol after 4:30 p.m. That's problematic. Seems like there's a lot of stuff not available to students at Capitol in the evenings and weekends now. Or am I thinking of somewhere else? No, I think it says Nantuck, where there's no library services evenings and weekends. Is that correct? Or is that Capitol also?
That is correct for Nantuck for the library. No evenings and weekends.
Yeah.
Same with Capitol, except I think they're trying to open a couple evenings, but right now after 4:30, the library and the weekends is closed also.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Anything else? It would be helpful, because, Jen, you mentioned that CPS came up also, and there's a lot of confusion about it. But so here's what would be really helpful. If folks would find case studies, right, of who gets flagged and how and what the resolution is, that would be helpful, because the story that I am getting from CT State Financial Aid is that this is a tool and it's not a policy, and it's not intended to be any more restrictive than anything else. So if we could just establish whether the things that we are seeing are intentional or a product of sort of misapplication, that would be helpful to distinguish what's actually going on. Right, so that would help. I know that we should mention, because at the colleges we know this, the universities maybe not, but a lot of the, that we have a lot of things that go, so we talked about IT and HR, all of those things are housed in shared services, which bypass local leadership. Right at the beginning of the semester, there was, second week of the semester, President Maduko had I forget what we called it, convocation, where he announced that a lot of those are coming back to campuses and will be under campus leadership. And that is happening. Like it's happening already. Things are moving, people are shifting about. But it and it is the move that I think we all wanted, and right, it's how it should be. But in the meantime, there's a lot of confusion about in what sense, under control, and just a lot of moving parts and figuring that out. For example, when we talk about guided pathways and different interpretations of guided pathways, how things are implemented, how students are advised very differently depending on what your approach is. So if it's coming under different CEOs, and different CEOs have different approaches, right? But students are taking courses on many different campuses and being advised by many different advisors with inconsistent advice. Like, it's very interesting. So we have to figure out what that means. So once again, lots of moving parts. Also, when we talk about like dean's meetings, we have dean's meetings, but I still haven't figured out what gets done, like what goes to the dean and what goes to the CEO. And I don't know if anybody else is confused. Like, I feel like we're just very confused about reporting lines at the moment, because they are moving. So, yeah. Anything else to talk about I got the course caps, Matthew, and I think we've been asking for a while how those get changed, and we don't know, right? No IT support. Anything else? Okay. The next thing is state funding and fringe benefit calculation. I think I kind of mentioned that in my report. Do you have any more to say about that? Is there anything else that we need to?
It's a mystery. I mean,
Yeah.
there's two slogans, and I'm going to defer here to Brendan and maybe Andre, who are economists. I'm just, a meddling philosopher. But the slogan used to be that they paid for all of the fringe benefits for some of the faculty. I'll limit myself to the faculty here. And now the slogan is they're paying some of the fringe benefits for all of the faculty. And it seems to mean, and subject to correction, this is just a philosopher's take on it, that all of the pension payments now are being done at the level of the institutions. Whereas the state is picking up all, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop there. I'm mixing myself up. But at any rate, those were the two slogans that I heard. So I'm going to defer here to Brendan. I really shouldn't have even started this.
I think, though, that is our area of expertise, since this seems to be a quantifier issue. Just saying.
Well, this goes back to the kind of budgeting that they had years ago. There were two budgets, and if you wanted to, let's say, expand or hire new people, you could hire them on one budget or the sort of fake budget, or basically it was either state money or it was tuition money. I think that was the sort of breakout. So if you needed to hire new people and you couldn't get the approval from whatever to put them on the state, budget, then you did it with the other budget. I mean, it was really weird, but and I'm not sure where things stand now, but that was the original division.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to having an in-depth conversation with folks with the numbers in front of us and the calculation in front of us, etc. I think that just the major takeaway right now is that we're being told that it has detrimental effects, right? Because I should also mention this, because if you engage with legislators, you might hear this and wonder why we're living on different planets. So I have heard a sort of narrative coming from OPM that they have significantly increased our block grant for the first time this year, right? And technically, it looks like it, but that is simply to cover the costs of the change in the fringe rate. And system office tells us it's a net negative, though it's intended to be neutral. And there is dispute about whether it is a net negative or neutral. So that's what's going on there. But sometimes half of the story comes out, and the story is we have significantly increased funding this year without the contextual information that we've also increased a certain kind of cost. So yeah. All right. Uh-huh.
Can I just ask Brendan to give us his take on it?
Honestly, I'd rather hold off until we hear something directly from the system office people, only because I know that the former VP for Finance made a statement on the record about, I believe it was fringe miscalculation by OPM over the summer. He's no longer the VP for Finance. I know OPM has written system office leadership saying, stop saying what you're saying about the calculation of fringe. You're wrong. So I honestly, there's just too many unknowns for me to say anything with any confidence at this point. So I wish I could offer a better analysis than that, but there's just too much uncertainty over exactly what's going on, in my opinion. But
okay, so what I'll do is I did have a phone conversation with Lloyd Blanchard, the new vice president or vice chancellor for finance, and I'm going to communicate with him again and ask this question specifically, so that we can come back to that. And also we can come back to the reserves question. I think those are two financially related issues, which we need to have additional information about and come back to.
Yeah, I think Dave, you and I might have talked about how this could have differentially benefited UConn because of their external funding and overhead. That's something we may very well want to continue to talk about, because I don't know why it should be the case that that campus should be favored by policy changes, unless it was intentional. So
yeah, this is something they've been advocating for years. Yeah, absolutely.
Because it takes the pension away from the institution and puts it at the system level and burdens the institutions with healthcare, which is rising faster than pension payments. But for an institution like UConn, which does a lot of external grants, right? They had to then include something like a 62% overhead for their pension contributions. And that, they said, made them less competitive with other institutions which didn't have to do that. So that's why I think this favors UConn, and it's probably, beneficial to them. But it's not beneficial to us if the rate of healthcare premiums is increasing much faster than the rate of pension payments.
Yeah.
So that's I think what is happening in part, as best I can figure it. But subject to Brendan's recommendation, we're going to let's ask for a specific clarification for that, including the issue of comparison with UConn.
Yeah. And again, we would have had someone here today. They were willing. It was just we couldn't get it scheduled properly. But I think in addition to understanding what that calculation is, how it plays out, it's the contextual and historical information is also really helpful to understand how, like, what to make of our funding. Has it gone up, down, that, whatever, right? And what happens at the colleges, what happens at the universities, what happens at UConn has been completely different. So the story is that, the community colleges have been hit the hardest. So, okay. Fisk, Brendan? Oh, you're muted, I think.
I'm going to share my screen here. It's just a 2-slide update. So the first thing I wanted to do was correct the record a little bit. The last time we met, there was impartial information about how this thing arrived on our campus. So some of that information has subsequently been filled in. So to correct the record, there was an RFP, a request for proposals that was put out by Eastern, and I have not seen all the different providers who replied to that. We have learned that the RFP itself mentioned one program to be one graduate program to be managed online, and the ultimate company that was selected, they ended up asking to manage 4 programs. There are papers that suggest this is a pattern for OPMs, that they sort of begin to reach their tentacles into additional programs as time progresses. And in addition, as part of that RFP, some faculty were involved apparently in looking at different responses. Again, I haven't seen minutes from those meetings, so I don't know exactly how that rolled out. At the finance subcommittee meeting, not the last one, but the one before it, Eastern CFO Jim Howarth suggested that their conservative estimate was that this would bring in $1.4 million to Eastern, but he also said this was a 50-50 split between Eastern and BISC, which would mean that BISC gets 1.4 million of those revenues, assuming the total is 2.8. The question then becomes, why are we sending Connecticut tuition dollars to Florida, and why are we creating jobs in Florida? In addition to the fact that it doesn't seem sort of to conform very well with part of the reasons why our institutions exist, which is that they're grounded in our communities here in Connecticut. The second reason why this is problematic is that it's done under a for-profit umbrella. So just to give you an example of the issue here, BISC pulls some profit out of this 1.4 million. I don't know how much, but let's say it's half, maybe 700,000. And what that means is only 700,000 is directed towards the recruiting activity, right? And the advising of students and that sort of thing. Whereas if we had actually offered this ourselves, all $1.4 million would have created jobs for people here in Connecticut in our communities. Moreover, we would be managing these people, and we would be able to do things like train them in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Whereas in Florida, the people that will be doing this are actually prohibited from being trained in diversity, equity, and inclusion under Ron DeSantis's Stop Woke Act. So I do not understand why we are importing that sort of state legislation onto our campuses and paying for it. Secondly, so as I said, here, the rationale is unclear to me. All $1.4 million could have been devoted to recruiting, advising, instead of some of it being diverted towards somebody maybe being able to buy a yacht with the $700,000. And the last point I want to make, I meant to email, forward this email to Mike Shea, but apparently the provost at Southern has mentioned BISC specifically to a department chair there, and has made claims about how that is relevant for whether Southern can offer a graduate program in the same field, and potentially mentioned the idea that if Southern wants to do something similar, they need to agree to do it under a consortium. So the discussion of BISC is now metastasizing to other campuses. There is apparently another organization that provides these OPM services called EAB, which is regularly meeting with Western's president. It's a little unclear if they're talking about OPM activity or other things, but I just wanted to correct the record, provide those updates, and share a little more information about what's happening. And Mike, I'll forward that email I have about the provost at Southern. Thank you.
For what it's worth, Brendan, we also already have EAB at Southern and have had them here for a long time. Both their software and, access to their people for consultate, what's the word? Consultants. They've had some consultants. We've contracted to have some consultants here to talk about various things. It's not been very helpful when they're here. So, but thanks.
What is EAB doing, Mike?
EAB. Well, first of all, we have EAB because it's a student record keeping system. So we partly use it for advising. Okay, that's kind of like the software part. But then there's also, you pay extra money if you want the consultants. Now I know our president is. I don't want to say too much about this, only because our president is re-examining whether he wants to keep doing this or not. Because I think a couple of visits by EAB to let's say the department chairs last spring, I wasn't there because I'm not chair, but was not very productive. And it's just consultancy things, right? That they're always doing, like BISC, I'm sure, is doing. So I just wanted you to know that we have a consulting situation too. But as I say, David, at least our president is looking at it, reconsidering it, not sure it's worth doing.
Yeah, it's important that we have this information and we can sort of, forewarn our institutions as well, or at least we will be forewarned, because either as external consultants taking up money, which could be better used otherwise, or as actually managing, right, which seems to be more than what EAB is doing in the case of BISC, this new acronym OPM, which is Online Program Management. And the problem here is a more general one, which I think we need to come back to as well in our list, Kalina, of things to come back to, which is how online programs are going to be generated and administered in the various institutions of the CSCU system, right? And there's one option, which is yet another option, and that is to centralize online programs somehow. There was a proposal for an office of online programs at the system office. I think that proposal, I was actually on that committee and I opposed it. And I think as well, it has been dropped at the system level. On the other hand, what role Charter Oak should play with respect to online programs, including those currently at specific institutions within the system, I think that's open for discussion, as well as, of course, this issue that you bring up, Brendan, about external, not just consultants, but managers. So really, it's an open terrain there, and I think we need to gather as much information as we can about it and include it as an agenda item, perhaps not at the next meeting, but at the meeting thereafter. After consulting, I think, with our institutional leadership to see exactly what direction they're heading in. I suggest that for 2 meetings from now.
Can I ask Brendan? So yeah, agree. Has there been any sort of forum where decision makers in this, move have had a conversation with folks because it just seems like a very straightforwardly kind of bad decision that's now spreading. I mean, I struggle to sympathize with this, especially, the details of the money, the commitment, the length of the commitment, etc. So has there been any such conversation?
There hasn't. The information has not been sort of widely shared or discussed. And in fact, when it has been shared in larger forums, in my opinion, it's been mischaracterized. So at least 2 administrators have referred to BISC as a marketing company. But of course, we also know that in one department on their agenda, there were changes to curriculum that were under discussion, and the rationale given was because BISC, quote unquote, wants this. That's not what a marketing company does, right? So there have not been discussions among large groups of faculty about this. There have not been open fora. The comments that have been made about it seem misleading. I mean, they could be accidentally misleading, but I'm not sure about that. There's an established track record of controversy around these organizations. This is again a product of this manufactured money crisis. I don't necessarily hold it against administrators or faculty who see this as a urgent situation and they're willing to try a whole lot of different things in order to quote unquote fix it. But sometimes you have to ask whether the cure is worse than the disease. And especially considering the fact that, in a state running a $1 or $2 or $3 billion surplus, bringing in $1.8 million is not really something people should be struggling to do. So I don't know if that answers your question, Kalina, but that's kind of, I think, where it is right now.
Thanks.
Could I add one more aspect to this, which I saw in the contract that was forwarded, a copy of the contract that was forwarded to us, and it appears that faculty, by agreeing to participate in this program, consign the intellectual content of their course to the university. And should, I suppose, the OPM make any modifications to curriculum, they would have a share of that as well. That's in contradiction to our collective agreement, which says that for online courses, the content remains the property of the faculty members who developed it. So that's an additional problem that this involves. And you're right, Brendan, that all of this is because of the unilateral focus on headcount. Just like the OPM, your headcount has gone down, your allocation is going to go down. So at the institutional level, they say, well, we've got to raise the headcount. There are good ways to do it. I think, for example, my university has demonstrated some good ways to do it. And I'm sure there are experiences at the other institutions as well. And then there are bad ways to do it. And you've just described one of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, this does seem to be an institution by institution, just accumulated decisions. There's nothing beyond that, right?
Well, there is something beyond that in a certain sense, not in the sense of BISC. I doubt if they are looking for, I don't know that they're looking for a system-wide, but I know that when I speak to senior leaders at the CSCU system, they always bring up at some point or other, what about online programs? And shouldn't we centralize in some way those online programs for economies
There's no
of scale?
indication that that's
et
part,
cetera.
this is part of that.
Yeah, so that's ancillary to it. It's not directly related to BISC, but the whole issue of what is our policy towards online programs. At the 4 CSUs, we went through the experience of online CSU, which was a failure because they didn't properly understand the market for yet another program of online courses. And so the online courses are largely consumed by students from the institution or students from in-state who live nearby and are attending an external university, but want to take an online course at an institution near where they live over the summer. So there's lots of complications here. Again, it's something I think to which we need to come back and have a fairly systematic analysis based also on the experiences of all the 4 universities, but also, bringing in Charter Oak, which primarily does online courses, but in a different context, in the context of allowing students to complete a degree with credits from various different other institutions. That's different from the kind of online courses, programs, which the universities offer, which are, especially at the graduate level, which are intended to be exclusively or to have the totality of credits offered through that online program. So, I mean, there's lots of things to be considered here.
Okay. We're at old or new business. And I know, Dave, but we have a list of things for future meetings, right? That we're gonna schedule.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
I have a quick question. Brendan, did you see my chat about my email for you to please send me your slides? And my other question about if you know what courses are impacted?
Yeah, I'll send what I have, Jennifer. Sorry for not get back.
No,
to
that's okay. Thank you so much. I just wanted, because the faculty at my campus were like, had a billion questions, and this would be so helpful. Not have to just go from my notes if I can glance at yours. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
I'll post up my PowerPoint as well.
Please do. Thank you. And Andre?
Motion to adjourn.
Woohoo.
My favorite motion.
I'll stop the recording now.